Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China has long been a champion of green development and environmental protection. With constant eco-environmental progress over the years, the country is getting greener and cleaner. Recently, the country's green commitments are further enhanced as the draft of its first ever environmental code was unveiled, marking a significant step towards bolstering green efforts and integrating various environmental regulations. What's in the draft code? How can it help improve China's current environmental laws and regulations? And how can China better work with the world in global environmental governance? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Wu Changhua, President of Global Climate Academy, Anaïs Berthier, Head of ClientEarth Brussels office, Ma Jun, Director of Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, and Jan Darpö, Emeritus Professor of Environmental Law at Uppsala University. Welcome to the show. So, Changhua, I will start with you. We know, we often read the reports of Chinese progress in terms of renewable energy, environmental protection, ecological protection. But for our international viewers, few of them probably are having the chance to visit China. Share with us, how do you characterize the Chinese progress in terms of, environmental protection and efforts against the climate change?
China definitely has made dramatic progress in terms of pollution reduction, pollution prevention and control, as reflected by the air quality, water quality, and the soil quality improvement, as well as waste management. But in the meantime, if you look at the ecosystem, conservation biodiversity, if you look at the forest coverage, China now has about 25% forest coverage already. And I think anecdotally, there's one data from NASA, I think a couple of years ago, just looking at, the greening part of the planet, 25% actually from China contributed actually to the global increase in terms of green part, forest literally. And then if you look at the wetlands, if you look at other ecosystems, China definitely has been making major progress in terms of ecological conservation, by diversity conservation there as well. A third dimension is really about climate change and decarbonization. China has been a steady player, a leadership in terms of working with the global community, tackling climate change, particularly reflected in terms of climate mitigation and by integrating clean technology, industrial value chain, as well as the product and services, as well as infrastructure together, literally delivering its commitment in terms of decarbonization. Mm-hmm. And I think lastly, look at, in terms of China with the global community, China has been regarded as a very important player, responsible player in terms of aligning its domestic agenda with the global climate environmental governance as well. But all in all, China definitely in the last few decades in particular, China has made major achievements, milestones, which are recognized by the global community there as well.
We are really focusing on this recently unveiled draft of the country's first ever environmental code submitted to lawmakers while soliciting public opinions. Once adopted, it will become China's second formal statutory code after the civil code in 2020. So Ma Jun, tell us more of your understanding. I know you have been closely involved in the creation of this code. Why the code now, and what's the significance of such a move?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think this is this new efforts to make the first ever code of environment, ecology, and environment is significant. Of course, technically, it can be quite helpful because China has created more than 30 laws and 100 regulations over the past more than 40 years and nearly 40 years. But there could be some fragmentation issues and conflict issues, so it needs to be codified. So this technically could be helpful. But I think far more profound impact of this code is because this is going to be the first ever code in the world to be named after code of ecology and environment. I think it's going to serve as a strong statement of the absolute priority given to protection of ecology and environment. And I think it epitomizes the ecological civilization and China's pursuit of green transition and low carbon development. So I think this is going to be a shift, profound shift from reactive environmental legislation towards something more systemic and integrated. So it's a fundamental. We're going to lay the fundamental framework for a mature continental legal system.
Marjun, in simple terms, what is the purpose of codifying all those existing laws and regulations here?
Yeah, as I mentioned, that China has developed all these laws and regulations, and the purpose, I think, as I mentioned, technically, it will be quite important to so-called codifying all these different laws and regulations, to harmonize them, integrate them, to make sure there will be no conflict between different laws. And also, it will be significant to try to integrate some of the practical challenges, all those individual legislation have endured, and also it's supposed to be forward-looking because we do have some of the mechanism innovated in China. For example, the eco-function zoning system, which divided China into 44,000 different eco-function zones, and other systems. And last but not least, areas like climate change. China so far hasn't made a climate action act. So all this will be represented in this code.
Anaïs, China has formulated its first environmental protection law in 1979, decades ago. Since then, the country has rapidly advanced legislation on environmental protection. Today, China has over 30 laws, more than 100 administrative regulations, and numerous other legal documents in this field. All these formed a relatively comprehensive legal framework. So tell us, legally speaking, what's the difference between legislation of law and a code here? Why is the compilation of a code so important for China to proceed, with environmental protection?
Thank you for the question. Well, first to reply, I want to start by saying that what China is doing is really impressive, is really important. It is essential for China to really make progress in relation to environmental protection and also to step up the fight against climate change, both at home and abroad. And by doing so, they will ensure a better future for the Chinese people, but also for everyone else living abroad. And so this codification exercise is really essential. I think I understood that there will be a chapter on green development, which is really important as well, and which is a good start. It would be great if it was considered as well to, for example, strengthen a bit the climate part with an ambitious climate law, as it's been already adopted in other European countries, for example. And in relation to that code, if I may say something else as well, which again really goes in the right direction and is really impressive, we also think that it would be great to ensure that there is some space and some relevant provisions in relation to the role that science plays, and to make sure that the decisions that are adopted are science-based. It's really important. The science is there. It tells us that we need to take urgent action to address the global triple crisis, the climate change, biodiversity loss, and the pollution crisis. And so it would be great to have some provisions to ensure that the scientific advisory boards and committees that I'm sure China has, just as Europe, are consulted in the relevant decision-making process to, again, make sure that we take into consideration and that the Chinese government takes science into consideration when they adopt their decisions in relation to the environment, but also to ensure that the private sector becomes accountable for the impact their economic activities have on the environment and on public health.
Well, Changhua, as panelist has pointed out, I mean, this is science-based, and I used to say, science-based, and also, of course, equally important is the enforcement. What do you make of this new efforts here by the Chinese side? And are you, do we have any concern about enforcement, especially in the private sector?
Thank you. I think I definitely learned a lot from my fellow panelists on this, sort of talk so far. I think, as we all agreed, this is a very significant, pivotal step taken by Chinese legislators to make sure, we call it ecological civilization, ecological integrity, as well as ecological security. Just a little bit back to what Anaïs said. At this moment, probably the current draft has not emphasized enough in terms of a science-based decision-making. But actually, if you read through the code so far, it's pretty much a sort of a science-based, because we've learned so much in the last few decades, in particular, around planetary boundaries, about the Earth systems. So we started to have more scientific knowledge, more data, more evidence, literally saying, okay, we do need to pivot in terms, change the narrative when we talk about environmental protection or ecological protection. So I want to emphasize that it's already science-based. That's pretty much aligned with the planetary boundary science, Earth system science, as, pretty much sort of aligned there already. Now, on the private sector, this is a very important part of the code, because if you look at some of the details there, for instance, private companies, enterprises actually are being held accountable, liable actually for their behaviors, development, business development there as well. A few highlights just to sort of emphasize this point. On one side, actually, so if you look at the disclosure, emissions disclosure reporting, and that's definitely becoming mandatory. So companies, particularly largest ones, they are already mandated to disclose their environmental performance, climate change impact, in particular aligned with the international framework there as well. And if you look at some key sectors, for instance, energy, construction, transport, manufacturing, because they count a big part of the emissions there, environmental footprints there. So they are mandated actually to put together their development planning and make sure that, that the pathway forward aligned with required environmental goals and the targets or commitments there as well. And if you look at finance, green finance, very similar to what's happening, in EU there as well. We emphasize the green finance. We have to make sure, green finance is green, and because we need the data, we need, information disclosure, everything like that. So very important today is coming together very nicely. Now, the challenge, though, we continue to be concerned about enforcement. Enforcement is complicated. Already, of course, we've been having enforcement challenges in terms of current environmental laws, regulations there. But now, just imagining the complexity of the, this code, of all the issues coming together, whether we have enough capability, enough enforcement mechanism together in order to make sure we really enforce the new, revised or new environmental code very effectively and impactfully. That remains a question to be seen.
Well, John, security now is a priority of a lot of countries, especially big powers. economic security, energy security, and of course we know that in the U.S., the Trump administration has relaxed the regulations in terms of oil and gas exploitation, and also talk about the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. Are you concerned that the global efforts will be affected because of the U.S. Policies?
That is a big question.
Yes.
Of course, we are all concerned by the barriers that are built up between the continents, the big powers, and EU, US, and China, India, etc. In my perspective, and I think almost everybody can join in that, cooperation when it comes to the protection of the environment and climate is crucial. And it's always quite worrying if we instead see trade wars and raised conflict. The level of conflict is raised. So surely I look forward to have more and closer cooperations between EU and China, and of course also US when that time comes, on for example climate change, but also on biodiversity. The tendencies and the development today, I think, are quite worrying, of course.
Anaïs, speak of cooperation, international cooperation, and the one, one pair of economies in China and the EU, they have been cooperating, I would say, rather well in the area of climate change. So where are we now? What's the, task, and what are the challenges? Where can we make more progresses in terms of fighting climate change?
Yes, well, I agree with what you just said. I think it's really, really concerning, the fact that climate change used to be the priority, used to be the challenge that we had to address, that governments were talking about. We had the European Green Deal in Europe under the previous mandate of the European Commission, and now it's been shifting towards more security and competitiveness as well. And so that's why I want to stress again that we need, we think, to have certain priorities. And one of them is to make companies transform and transfer and transition towards other business models, and to make sure that the business models that depend on environmental degradation becomes unprofitable, uninsurable, and potentially, hopefully one day, unlawful. And so that's why it's really important to have the relevant legislation in place. There is a great potential for collaboration on that between the EU and China. Actually, 2025 marks the 15th anniversary of the EU-China diplomatic relations. And over the years, EU-China cooperation on the environment has been fruitful, and in-depth engagement and mutual learning has happened. And actually, I see this codification of its environmental legislation as an opportunity to continue cooperating with China. There is hopefully hope. The transition is underway. Many governments and major investors actually increasingly recognize that a sustainable future is not only necessary, but it's financially smart. And we're actually hearing more and more a significant part of the industry in Europe saying that it is legislation and it is the fact to regulate the corporate behavior that fosters innovation, not deregulation. And so that's why this endeavor carried out by China of codifying its environmental legislation is so crucial.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Anaïs. As an international environmental law expert, I wonder, what role does the current environmental legal system or international conventions, at the legal level, play in the global environmental governance and efforts against climate change?
Well, we think it's really, really important, and potentially the most important levers, actually, the law to lead to the environmental transformation that we need. The law is actually can shape the world around us. And the law and international conventions, such as the Aarhus Convention that Jan and I have been working on a lot, and that provides procedural rights to the members of the public, is really, really important. As an example, the Aarhus Convention that provides access to information, public participation, access to justice as well in environmental matters to the members of the public is crucial because it provides and makes sure that the governments have the buy-in from the people, have the support from the people when they adopt relevant decisions. And it also prevents some backlash and some potential litigation. So yeah, the law shapes behavior and can shape our future. And so actually the measures and the laws that are going to be adopted today will determine whether we hit or whether we miss the target in relation to climate, nature, health, and justice.
Yeah. Changhua, what's your view of this international cooperation in this area? I know China has remained active domestically and internationally, but also we are facing challenges in terms of global efforts against climate change, right?
I think the first point is about what the Trump administration has done so far in this new administration to the international climate governance, climate collaboration. It's been very damaging. So since day one he took office, he released the president executive order about withdrawing again the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. The title of the executive order is very interesting. It says the American first in the international environmental sort of governance, right? And in the meanwhile, actually domestically, he's been revoking hundreds of environmental laws, regulations there. And thirdly, very damagingly, canceling the U.S. international aids in terms of financial aids and other aids there as well. So that's been very, very damaging. Now, on the positive side, if you look at China, particularly represented by this environmental code, China is pioneering at this moment. China is fully dedicated to the multilateral global climate environmental governance mechanism there, because we are talking about the planetary health, the Earth system, the health, the life support system. Actually, we, humanity living on this planet, we have to make sure that the planetary health as well as ecological integrity. So China definitely is pioneering this effort, not on one side, demonstrating its continued dedication for this international multilateral collaboration. But in the meantime, really aligning a domestic development agenda with the global process there as well. So China definitely has set a good example. Now, in terms of China and the EU, I think there are very, very positive signs and signals. I think a lot of people these days, particularly against the backdrop of the US situation, EU and China close collaboration, advancing the global climate action becomes so critical at this very moment. And we need to, the two largest economies actually need to come together and working not only with each other, but in the meantime, bringing all the global community together, developing countries together to continue to support successful international process, particularly COP30 at the end of this year in Brazil, make sure we continue to elevate the level of ambition of climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and continue to mobilize more financial resources to not only invest in clean energy, clean transition, but very importantly to invest, supporting other developing countries to fight climate change and adapt to climate change there as well. Back to the environmental code, I think one very important sort of line to keep in mind is that in the past, environmental laws are often reactive because we need to address those problems.
Right.
But the environmental code China is talking about now is really emphasizing the proactive part. Really not only, of course, we need to address the pollution side, but very importantly, we had to make sure, to ensure the integrity of the ecological red lines, integrity is their ecosystem of goods and services function in there as well. Very importantly, to have climate change and all the other policy tools and instruments together. So it's not just simply about reducing the emissions, the carbon emissions. Very importantly, how do we transform together our economy, our infrastructure, our society, our industry together actually towards a really sustainable future.
Related to, of course, what we have talked about, international, global efforts, Ma Jun, we know that except for developed economies, of course, there's also concern from the developing world, especially least developed countries. People are always concerned about, the relationship of the balance between, say, development and also environmental protection. If you take a look at the Chinese, code, environmental code, it seeks to strike a balance between economic, social development and environmental protection. So what's your understanding of this point, and how has China done so far in terms of balancing the two sides?
Yes, I think this is a common challenge faced by the entire world, but our observation of the past 40 years, more than 40 years of China's economic taking off, demonstrate that it's not a zero-sum game. The first couple of decades, before 2000, I think China basically, in most of the time, it's development at any cost, and then after that, 2000 to 2011, our economy is really, scaled up, and in the meantime, the coal consumption got tripled in just that short period of time. As a result, we suffered from smog, severe smog, and water pollution got really bad. Hundreds of millions exposed to health hazards, and but ever since 2012, China changed its policy and embraced the concept, theory of eco-civilization, and try to embark on pollution control and launch all this pollution control actions, national cleanup actions, and in more recent years, since 2000, try to set target for carbon peak neutrality. I think all this actually, through the past 12 years, we can see Chinese economy continue to grow, at around 6%, and then with only 3% or less of the energy, increase of energy. So this decoupling started happening in certain ways, and while our air quality have been improved by more than 56% across the country, and the water quality is significantly improved. So I think this is set some good lessons, for the other developing countries, which are also eager to pursue economic growth. But in the meantime, many of them already suffered from air pollution, water pollution, and soil and coastal seas. So, and they also need to tackle the climate change. So I think together, the global South, there's a chance to share all this best practice and compare notes, and to help each other. I think there's a very big room for a global collaboration on that.
With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.